Oh, I'm live. Hi. Hi, I'm Patti, and I'm reading you Abandonment to Divine Providence by Jean-Pierre de Cassauld, who's a Jesuit. Jesuits are known for 12 years of seminary, 12 consecutive years of vows of progressing dedication to an order. Jesuits are definitely people who are social justice folks who go into communities like the neighborhood I grew up in and take over failing, impoverished churches like the ones my parents grew up in. And Jesuits, there's a lot of Jesuits who are canon lawyers who know a lot of details and significance behind very intricate dogmatic principles. That's been my experience with Jesuits. I do not know this one. Section 9. Sanctity Made Easy. Conclusion of the first chapter. How easy sanctity becomes when this doctrine is properly understood. I believe that if those souls that tend towards sanctity were instructed as to the conduct they ought to follow, they would be spared a good deal of trouble. I speak as much of people in the world as of others. If they could realize the merit concealed in the actions of each moment of the day, I mean in each of the daily duties of their state of life, and if they could be persuaded that sanctity is founded on that to which they give no heed as being altogether irrelevant, they would indeed be happy. If besides they understood that to attain the utmost height of perfection, the safest and surest way is to accept the crosses sent them by Providence at every moment, that the true philosopher's stone is submission to the will of God, which changes into divine gold all their occupations, troubles, and suffering, what consolation would be theirs? What courage would they not derive from the thought that to acquire the friendship of God and to arrive at eternal glory, they had but to do what they were doing, but to suffer what they were suffering, and that what they wasted and counted as nothing would suffice to enable them to arrive at eminent sanctity, far more so than extraordinary states and wonderful works. Oh my God, how much I long to be the missionary of your holy will and to teach all that there is nothing more easy, more attainable, more within reach, and within the power of everyone than sanctity. How I wish that I could make them understand that just as the good and the bad thief had the same things to do and to suffer, so also two persons, one of whom is worldly and the other leading an interior and holy spiritual life, have, neither of them, anything different to do or to suffer. But that one is sanctified and attains eternal happiness by submission to your holy will in those very things by which the other is damned because he does them to please himself, or endures them with reluctance and rebellion. This proves that it is only the heart that is different. Ugh, all that you read this. It will cost you no more than to do what you are doing, to suffer what you are suffering, only act and suffer in a holy manner. It is the heart that must be changed. When I say the heart, I mean will. Sanctity, then, consists in willing all that God wills for us. Yes, sanctity of heart is a simple fiat, a conformity of will with the will of God. Inshallah. What could be more easy? And who could refuse to love a will so kind and so good? Let us love it then, and this love alone will make everything in us divine. Chapter 2. The divine action works unceasingly for the sanctification of souls. Section 1. The divine action. The divine action, although only visible to the eye of faith, is everywhere and always present. All creatures that exist are in the hands of God. The action of the creature can only be perceived by the senses, but faith sees in all things the action of the Creator. It believes that in Jesus Christ all things live, and that his divine operation continues to the end of time, embracing the passing moment and the smallest created atom in its hidden life and mysterious action. The action of the creature is a veil which covers the profound mysteries of the divine operation. After the resurrection, Jesus Christ took his disciples by surprise in his various apparitions. He showed himself to them under various disguises, and in the act of making himself known to them, disappeared. This same Jesus, ever living, ever working, still takes by surprise those souls whose faith is weak and wavering. There is not a moment in which God does not present God's self under the cover of some pain to be endured, of some consolation to be enjoyed, or of some duty to be performed. All that takes place within us, around us, or through us contains and conceals God's divine action. It is really and truly there, present, but invisibly present, so that we are always surprised and do not recognize God's operation until it has ceased. If we could lift the veil, and if we were attentive and watchful, God would continually reveal God's self to us, and we should see God's divine action in everything that happened to us and rejoice in it. At each successive occurrence, we should exclaim, "It is the Lord," and we should accept every fresh circumstance as a gift of God. We should look upon creatures as feeble tools in the hands of an able workman, and should discover easily that nothing was wanting to us, and that the constant providence of God disposed him to bestow upon us at every moment whatever we required. If only we had faith, we would show goodwill to all creatures. We would cherish them and be interiorly grateful to them as serving by God's will for our perfection. If we live the life of faith without intermission, we should have an uninterrupted commerce with God and a constant familiar intercourse with him. What the air is for the transmission of our thoughts and words, such would be our actions and sufferings for those of God. They would be as the substance of God's words, and in all external events, we should see nothing but what was excellent and holy. This union is effected on earth by faith, in heaven by glory. The only difference is in the method of its working. God is interpreted by faith. Without the light of faith, creation would speak to us in vain. It is a writing in cipher in which we find nothing but confusion and entangled mesh from which no one would expect to hear the voice of God. But as Moses saw the fire of divine charity in the burning bush, so faith gives us the clue to the cipher and reveals to us in this mass of confusion marvels of divine wisdom. Faith changes the face of the earth. By the heart it is raised, entranced, and becomes conversant with heavenly things. Faith is our light in this life. By it, we possess the truth without seeing it. We touch what we cannot feel and see what is not evident to the senses. By it, we view the world as though it did not exist. It is the key of the treasure house, the key of the abyss, of the science of God. It is faith that teaches us the hollowness of created things. By faith, God reveals and manifests God's self in all things. By faith is the veil torn aside to reveal the eternal truth. All that we see is nothing but vanity and deceit. Truth can only be found in God. What a difference between the thoughts of God and the illusions of man. How is it that although continually warned that everything that happens in the world is but a shadow, a figure, a mystery of faith, we look at the outside only and do not perceive the enigma they contain? We fall into this trap like men without sense, instead of raising our eyes to the principle, source, and origin of all things, in which they all have their right name in just proportions, in which everything is supernatural, divine, and sanctifying, in which all is part and the plenitude of Jesus Christ. And each circumstances is as a stone towards the construction of the heavenly Jerusalem. And all helps to build a dwelling for us in that marvelous city. We live according to what we see and feel and wander like madmen in a labyrinth of darkness and illusion for want of light of day. Darkness and illusion for want of the light of faith, which would guide us safely through it. By means of faith, we should be able to aspire after God and to live for God alone, forsaking and going beyond mere figures. Section 2. By faith, the operation of God is recognized. The more hidden the divine operation beneath an outwardly repulsive appearance, the more visible it is to the eye of faith. The soul, enlightened by faith, judges of things in a very different way to those who, having only the standard of the senses by which to measure them, ignore the inestimable treasure they contain. He who knows that a certain person in disguise is the king behaves towards him very differently to another who, only perceiving an ordinary man, treats him accordingly. In the same way, the soul that recognizes the will of God in every smallest event, and also in those that are most distressing and direful, receives all with an equal joy, pleasure, and respect. It throws open all its doors to receive with honor what others fear and fly from with horror. The outward appearance may be mean and contemptible, but beneath this abject garb, the heart discovers and honors the majesty of the king. The deeper the abasement of his entry in such a guise and in secret, the more does the heart become filled with love. I cannot describe what the heart feels when it accepts the divine will in such a humble, poor, and mean disguise. Ah, how the sight of God, poor and humble, lodged in a stable, lying on straw, weeping and trembling, pierced the loving heart of Mary. Ask the inhabitants of Bethlehem what they thought of the child. You know what answer they gave, and how they would have paid court to him had he been lodged in a palace, surrounded by the state, due to princes. Then ask Mary and Joseph, the Magi and the shepherds. They will tell you that they found in this extreme poverty an indescribable tenderness and an infinite dignity worthy of the majesty of God. Faith is strengthened, increased, and enriched by those things that escape the senses. The less there is to see, the more there is to believe. To adore Jesus on Thabor, to accept the will of God in extraordinary circumstances, does not indicate a life animated by such great faith as to love the will of God in ordinary things, and to adore Jesus on the cross. For faith cannot be said to be real, living faith until it is tried and has triumphed over every effort for its destruction. War with the senses enables faith to obtain a more glorious victory. To consider God equally good in things that are petty and ordinary, as in those that are great and uncommon, is to have a faith that is not ordinary, but great and extraordinary. To be satisfied with the present moment is to delight in and to adore the divine will in all that has to be done or suffered in all that succession of events that fill as they pass each present moment. Those souls that have this disposition adore God with redoubled love and respect in each consecutive, humiliating condition. Nothing can hide God from the piercing eye of faith. The louder the senses proclaim that in this or that there is no God, the more firmly do these souls clasp and embrace their bundle of myrrh. Nothing daunts them, nothing disgusts them. Mary, when the apostles fled, remained steadfast at the foot of the cross. She owned Jesus as her son when he was disfigured with wounds and covered with mud and spittle. The wounds that disfigured him made him only more lovable and adorable in the eyes of this tender mother. The more awful were the blasphemies uttered against him, so much deeper became her veneration and respect. The life of faith is nothing less than the continued pursuit of God through all that disguises, disfigures, destroys, and, so as to say, annihilates God. It is in very truth a reproduction of the life of Mary who, from the stable to the cross, remained unalterably united to that God whom all the world misunderstood, abandoned, persecuted. In like manner, faithful souls endure a constant succession of trials. God hides beneath the veils of darkness and elusive appearances which make his will difficult to recognize. But in spite of every obstacle, these souls follow God and love God, even to the death of the cross. They know that leaving the darkness, they must run after the light of this divine sun from which its rising to its setting, however dark and thick may be the clouds that obscure it, enlightens, warms, and inflames the faithful hearts that bless, praise, and contemplate it during the whole circle of its mysterious course. Pursue then without ceasing, you faithful souls, this beloved spouse, who with giant strides passes from one extremity of the heavens to the other. If you be content and untiring, nothing will have power to hide him from you. God moves above the smallest blades of grass as above the mighty cedar. The grains of sand are under God's feet as well as the huge mountains. Wherever you may turn, there will you find God's footprints. And in following them perseveringly, you will find God wherever you may be. Oh, what delightful peace we enjoy when we have learned by faith to find God thus in all God's creatures. Then darkness is luminous, and bitterness sweet. Faith, while showing things as they are, changes their ugliness into beauty and their malice into virtue. Faith is the mother of sweetness, confidence, and joy. It cannot help feeling tenderness and compassion for its enemies, by whose means it is so immeasurably enriched. The greater the harshness and severity of creature, the greater, by the operation of God, is the advantage to the soul. While the human instrument strives to do harm, the divine workman, in whose hands it is, makes use of its very malice to remove from the soul all that might be prejudicial to it. The will of God has nothing but sweetness, favors, and treasures for submissive souls. It is impossible to repose too much confidence in it, nor to abandon oneself to it too utterly. It always acts for and desires that which is most conducive to our perfection, provided we allow it to act. Faith does not doubt. The more unfaithful, uncertain, and rebellious are the senses, the louder faith cries, "All is well. It is the will of God." There is nothing that the eye of faith does not penetrate, nothing that the power of faith does not overcome. It passes through the thick darkness, and, no matter what clouds may gather, it goes straight to the truth, and holding to it firmly will never let it go. Thanks for joining me today. I'm Reader Patti, and I'll see you next time.